Hello everyone, welcome back to our bootcamp session. Um, Today we'll continue with our training on React. Jessab, you want to start with it?
Yes, today is going to be a little bit tough. And what do you think, Zeeshan?
It might be a bit more tough.
The thing is, today we are going to start with understanding what is asynchronous coding. Up to now, we have been doing synchronous coding. Now, you have to understand something. Let me give you an example. For example, let's assume that I have just hired a chef. He is my employee, I'm paying him. And I go to him and tell him, sit on my table, dining table, and tell my chef, new hired chef, which I've imported from France, to make me a souffle. And I will wait on my table till he makes the souffle. This is an example of synchronous coding. Why? When I ask my chef to start preparing the souffle, I don't do anything else. I wait for the souffle to be completed, and as soon as it is completed, and then I eat my souffle. Have you ever guys eaten souffles? Adil?
No, I haven't had souffle.
Yeah, what guys you guys do? What you guys have done in life?
To give us a treat with super.
Okay, we'll do it. Now the thing is, think about a normal function call. If we make a normal function call, unless we get a return value, when the function completes, you are waiting for the function to complete. Am I right, Zeeshan?
Yes.
Because most people, they have been so used to synchronous coding, they never think about this thing at all. I also never used to do it. The point is, a normal synchronous function call. Could you give me an example, Zeeshan? Could you some show with normal synchronous function call?
Let me show just a moment. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So we have an index.js file, and here we are.
It's a normal call.
This is a normal function. And
Yes.
let's say we this is how we call it.
After that, also do some that dinner is complete. Right to console dinner is complete.
So let me do both sides so that we know. Here it is. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay, just a moment. So I need to add.
This is a normal function call, which we call as asynchronous code.
So here it is. It's in a hello world, and in console we can see prepare food. Before prepare food, food is preparing, and then after prepare food.
Now, when we are preparing food, what do you have to do? When we are calling that function, what is happening? It is blocking until the function is called
When
and
it
it is
calls
completed.
this,
The other line cannot.
Yes.
You have to wait for it to complete and prepare food. After prepare food,
Yes.
is returns, then it goes to the next line.
Yes.
Now, Zeeshan, can you give an example of asynchronous code like this? Maybe use timeout, set timeout.
So yeah, what we need to do is first we need to understand the timeline of the execution. This line initially, first this line will be executed, then this function will be declared, then this function will be called, and once we call this function, execution transfer to this function, and it executes the console.log, then it returns to this line. So execute in sequence, and once the prepare food returns, then we will go to the line number 10 and go write the console log. So in async calls, what we actually we will be doing is, what we are trying to do is that the call, you that food is done, so that you can then eat the food. So that's how you need to do. So for that, as of now, we are not we do not have any IO operation or API call. So what we'll do is to make it a background call, or convert the to shift the timeline. What we can do is we can use a function called set timeout. And for set timeout, one thing I just need to explain again for just for a moment, so that everyone gets the arrow function again. This is our normal function. In arrow function, what we do is we remove all these and make it like this. This is our arrow function. So here in set timeout, I'm passing the arrow function, so it is actually a function. And here what we'll do is we will send the prepare food over here. Once the prepare food is done, and then it's in set timeout. Set timeout requires time, or you can do it without the time, so it will just run in background soon after its execution, but it will change the timeline of the execution of the function. Should I show the result?
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened is, before prepare food, and dinner is ready. Prepare food is not done yet, but you have been prompted for food ready. So the person who's preparing food informed you that food is ready before even it's in done. Uh, should I add something else?
The point is, you now this code is simple enough, but you need to understand how to execute it. If, for example, we want to set a timeout for, let's say, 20 milliseconds,
Okay.
and then we want to do something else after 30 milliseconds, how are you going to achieve that?
Okay, so first we need to understand that at this moment the problem we have is the function execution is the prepare food is done at the later time. So once you have done with the execution, you need to access the result. At this moment we do not have access the result. This function is being called, and we are not actually we are not getting any information after the food is done. So once this function execution done, so there are 2 points. The one you mentioned that we need to do something at the after the 30 millisecond, and one is we need the result. So for that, what we need to do is first we need to add callbacks so that we can access the result, because the person who is preparing the food is not informing you afterwards. It's just done the food is in your kitchen and you don't know what to do. You learning and you forget to eat the food.
Now I have to give the example. The example is, in this case, what we have done is we have gone to the kitchen, asked the chef to prepare souffle, and then forgotten about it and are doing our own stuff, doing other things. But the problem is we don't know when the food is complete. So therefore, we don't know when the souffle is ready. Then how am I supposed to eat it if I don't know when the souffle will be is ready? So in order to get informed when the souffle is ready, you need a callback. Let's write a callback. A callback function.
Okay, so now what we need the concept of callback is you can send a function to a function, so that once the background function or the function which is working in a separate timeline, once that function is done, that function calls your function so that it comes to your timeline and you can access the result. So what we can do is there are 2 ways. What I can do is I'll be sending a function. So first this function need to accept. We can name it anything, ABC, A or B, but generally for callback we say name callback. So we are accepting a callback, and in the prepare food, what we will do is we will send function.
We are sending a reference to
function
a function.
Is accepting a value. So sorry.
We are sending a function in the parameter of a function.
Sorry, I didn't. Yeah, we are sending a function in a parameter of function. So actually, let me separate it so that, and then I'll move back to it. This is a function. Let's say.
Why don't you return something?
This function we will pass, not call it. We are just passing it, my callback, and we are just passing it. So this is the function normally we do. So now what I'll do is I just keep that function so that you can review it, and what I'll do is create the arrow function. So we keep learning the new syntax. Okay. Now we are done with the callback. We are providing the callback. So we are saying what you say, the person who is preparing the food. So once you are done, just inform me. So how do you inform? You say call this function. So the person who's preparing your food need to call this function, and this function will available here in
Zeeshan,
callback.
I think you jump to the callback function directly very quickly. Please
Okay.
remove this code for now and go back to your previous code which you are passing the callback function. Yes. No, I'm saying remove this, just pass callback, because it for new person it becomes very complicated. They don't understand how the function is being called inside the function. How you are passing a function inside a parameter of function.
Is it fine now?
Yeah, now, yes. Now,
So
everybody.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So now we have passed this function into prepare food, and this function will pass over here. And once the set timeout is done, once the prepare food is done, what it can do is it can call a function and pass the value is ready. Now what will happen is, once this JavaScript execution starts, it will execute the before prepare food. It will declare the function, not call the function. It will declare this function. It will declare this another function, and then it will call prepare food and pass a function in prepare food. So what we are saying, the person who is preparing the food, we are saying that here is the function. Once you are done with the preparation of food, inform me. So now it's the responsibility of the person who's preparing the food to inform you. And this is how you will use the information. So you pass that information. Now this in set timeout, it is preparing the food. And once it is done, what it'll do is it call your function, the callback, because we know that it is a function. So callback round bracket. So we are assuming that this callback, it's a function, and we know that it is a function. Callback round bracket and the value, and this value will appear here. So then once it is done, it will call your callback, and then you know that your food is ready.
Okay, let's revise it. We start off by saying that we are getting ready to prepare food. Then we are not going to discuss declaring the prepare food. It's thinking about it that we are hiring a chef, which created a function.
Yes.
Then what we did, we wrote a callback, and we called our prepare food. As soon as prepare food starts executing, we will go to the next line before even it returns. Therefore, can you print something you have printed? This thing. Now, can you run this and see what happens?
Okay. Now, before prepare food and after prepare food, these both lines, this one and this console log, they executes before soon after the prepare food is being called, because inside that function there is a set timeout, and now it's in separate timeline. So your JavaScript will keep executing and will move forward, and then your function being called and set timeout being called, and your set timeout printed the prepare food. So there can be any line of execution. There can be 100 line of code that running some logic. Once it is done, it calls the callback function. So you can see the value of food ready. So it's called the callback function. So the execution move to this function, and then it calls this value. So here we can see value equals to food is ready.
Adil bhai, can you explain this code, this callback code?
Yeah. Okay. So what we've done is we've broken it down into a couple of logical steps, and we've broken the chain. So It's not a procedural execution of code. It's everything is not happening one at a time. What we've done is created like a parallel execution, you could maybe say. So if you look at how it works, when the page load, it starts from the top, and you get the first initial log coming out, which reads out before preparing food. So that's where it starts, and so far it is sequential. But as soon as that happens, and we hit the function prepare food, within the function there's a set timeout. So that's when it triggers a parallel execution, and the main execution of our JavaScript proceeds without waiting for this to complete, and we get this final console.log here, which reads out the after prepare food, dinner is ready. So now in our actual execution, in our events, we have the first log and the last log, and everything in between is going on in the background. As soon as this log comes out, the function is still executing. When this function now executes, what happens is it prints out the prepare food console log here. The steps executes first, and that's why we see it number 3 in our log list. And once this step is finished, we're calling this function, this callback function. And what it does is it's passing the value of this function back to our main JavaScript, because this is running in a parallel timeline. So what's going to happen is, as soon as this finishes, it's going to be calling this callback function, and the way that it's working is the value food is ready is being passed into the value, and here we have the execution. So when we run the prepare food function, it prints out the initial log, the prepare food, then it calls the callback function, which passes the value through the parameters here, and it will print out the food is ready at the very last.
So therefore, the point is the asynchronous code is doing a lot of things simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
Now the problem is the code above is very simple enough,
Mm-hmm.
but as soon as we, let's say, take another example. If we want to say that prepare first souffle in 10 milliseconds and then prepare French toast for me. You know, I'm a connoisseur of sweet dishes. In the first 20 milliseconds, first I want to prepare the souffle, and then we want to, in the next 20 milliseconds, I want French toast to be prepared. How do we do that?
Okay, so there is 2 ways I can write in a separate function. So what we can do is function prepare French toast, and okay. So now we have a prepare French toast, and what we want is, once the prepare food is done, then we need to call the French toast. So if let me give another create another call. Let me first call this directly. Prepare French toast. Okay. Now the problem is, once the prepare food is being called, it will go in the background, and prepare French toast will be called directly, and it will start executing, and it also has the call in the background. So there will be 2 calls in the background. It will be running in the background, but we don't want them to be in parallel. We want them to be in background, but in a sequential way. That's what you are saying, right? So
Yes. How do we do that?
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll create another call for French toast. I'll do one more callback. So it will call this callback, and what I'll say is food callback. Okay, so here we have the French toast callback. We'll pass this French toast callback. At this moment, still these are two asynchronous function. They both will run in a background, but in parallel. We want them in sequence. So what we
Therefore,
need to
my chef has started preparing my souffle and French toast simultaneously at the same
yes,
time.
yes.
We don't want that. We want first for him to prepare the French souffle. I'll start
Mhm.
eating it, and he then will makes me the fresh French toast which I want. That's what we are
Okay.
looking for.
So how we will know that food is done is by this callback. Once the prepare food is done, prepare food has this my callback. So once the my callback starts executing, that means our food is ready. So what we need to do is we need to move this prepare French toast function into this callback. In this way, when execution starts, it will just run this console. It will declare 4 functions, and it will call the prepare food. It will go, the execution will go in the background, and the console.log will appear. So your execution of this JavaScript will end. Now the prepare food will what will prepare food do is it will call the set timeout, and it call the console log, and it call the callback. Once the callback is being called, we know that prepare food is done. Now here we are calling prepare French toast and passing a callback function. So then now it will call prepare French toast, callback, it will execute the set timeout, and once the French toast is ready, it will call the this callback function. So that means this French toast callback function. So French toast is ready. Food is ready. Let me show
This
this.
food talk is making me hungry, guys.
You like Adil? You like French toast?
I like French toast. Yeah.
Okay, so the before prepare and after prepare is done. That means your normal JavaScript execution ends. Now the prepare food function, prepare food. This is the prepare food function. It calls the prepare food, and once it is done, it calls the food is ready callback. So food is ready. This callback being called. This is here, and then it calls the prepare French toast. So it will execution will go over here, and now it's again will go into the background. So execution will be in background, asynchronous, but in a sequential way. First, prepare food will go in the background. It will once it is done, then prepare French toast will start executing, and then once it is done, its callback will also be called over here.
Adil bhai, can you revise this?
Yes. Okay. So before, what we were doing is we had our main code execution, and within it we created a parallel simultaneous execution for the when we had the food preparation stuff. What we did now is we wanted to create another. We wanted to do multiple steps when we were preparing the food. So which is starting to prepare the food, and then also have the French toast, which would have to be done. um, so what we wanted is that the food would cook first, and then the French toast would cook second, instead of them also being in parallel. So the way that this was done is we had our initial function the prepare food function, which starts the initial simultaneous timeline, the separate timeline, and that executes. And as before, we had the callback function, which is below here on line 14. Right, and yes, so when the callback function executes, it returns that your food is ready, and once the food is ready, then we call the function to prepare the French toast. So this will wait until the food is actually ready to call the French toast function, and then when you come to the French toast function, it will again create the use the set timeout and create another parallel process to prepare the food, and then it will call the French toast callback function to return the final value that says French toast is ready.
So this is how we used to do programming, asynchronous programming.
With
Zeeshan with callbacks. Now, Zeeshan, they used to call something callback hell.
Yes.
Why people hated writing callbacks?
Okay, so at this moment, what we did is we did it in quite separate functions. So if you can see at this moment, once you call this function prepare food, it has a callback. It's this callback. Once you call this prepare function, then you have another callback. Now let's say, for example, now you want your chef to prepare a coffee. So there will be another asynchronous function that will be running in the background, but it should be done after French toast. So you don't want your coffee to be called out. So let's say then I'll create it in a pyramid way. So let's prepare a coffee.
And while you do that, I also want a tea as well. hence the hell, right?
Okay, so
Adil, you need a wife who can prepare all these things for you.
I have a cook. I don't need a wife for that.
okay,
That's good.
so this prepare coffee, for this prepare coffee, we now again need callback. So there will be a third callback, which we call coffee callback. And we will say coffee is ready, and this callback will be passed. Now what we need to do is, once the French toast is ready, then we need to call this. So we'll call prepare coffee inside the French toast callback. Now what will happen is, now you can start imagining that we call the prepare food. Once it is done, it will call the my callback. It will call prepare French toast. In French toast, it will call the callback, which is French toast callback. So you can see the execution jumps here and there too frequently. Then it once the prepare coffee is being called, it for its callback, it will call the coffee callback. So this starts jumping towards.
First of all, it's very difficult to follow the code. Where is it going and debug it?
So let me add. I want to move it into the pyramid way. So I want to pass those functions directly in the function callback. So let me change the index. And I'll change the file name. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll instead of passing my callback, what I'll do is I'll send the function over here. So don't need to do anything special, just cut it and paste over here. Now over here, we need, once this callback is done, we can remove the name. We need to call French toast. So now then we need to call the French toast callback, which will pass over here. Once the French toast is done, we'll need to call the coffee and then coffee's callback function. So here we can see the prepare food, it's callback, then we call French toast, it's callback, then we call prepare coffee and it's callback. This is called what you say, callback hell or pyramid of doom. Sometimes say it's a pyramid. So as soon as you start moving towards, once after the coffee, maybe you need something. What should we have after coffee?
Cake.
Maybe have a cake.
Okay, have a cake. So there will be another call. So it will start. It will start confusing your code. There will be a lot of problems to understand and completely follow the code, because it will have too much code inside of another function. And there is another problem which callbacks does not handle. If there is an error, callback as a built-in way, there is no any functionality or feature. If there is an error, so we can handle that error. Let's say in this execution we face an error. So if there is an error, how the pyramid will handle, how the callback will be handled, there is also not any feature for this. And this
My problem, I used to call this callback hell because I had extreme difficulty in matching the curly braces.
There's
They
a
were
first
curly.
one, there's the second one.
There's third one, and even if you have one problem with one curly braces, you miss one.
Yes.
It takes 30 minutes to debug what the hell is going on.
And a student needs to understand that at this moment, this is only a single line code. This callback is just a single line callback at this moment, because we are learning it. In real life application, you will not have a single line of code. You will have a multiple line of logic in a callback. So there can be 10, 20 or 100 line of code over here.
So therefore, what we learned is there are two kinds of programming. One is synchronous, where everything is blocking calls. The other one is synchronous, where everything runs in parallel. And in synchronous calls, asynchronous programming, you basically can do all the asynchronous programming you want by using callbacks.
Yes.
But the problem was, it had some problems, as I mentioned. To me, the problem was it became very complicated, and in order to debug it, it became extremely difficult. And people proposed, and JavaScript adopted the promises model. Zeeshan, what are the promises model? But before we go forward, let Adil revise this thing. Help us revise this thing.
This pyramid.
Sure. Okay, so what we wanted, what the objective, right? So we start from there, and then we can understand the code better. So the objective was we ask our cook to prepare the food, and once he prepares the food, then we ask him to prepare some French toast. And once the French toast is ready, we want the cook to also prepare some coffee, and so on. Maybe after the coffee, we want to have cake. And as somebody said in the comments, maybe after the cake, we want something else. Somebody suggested nihari after the cake. So anyway, so we have a series of steps that we want to process, but this block of code, this is more procedural, but our overall code is not synchronous. We want this to all happen in the background while our main code executes and completes. So if you, Zeeshan, do you have the log available when you run this?
A log?
Yeah, if you open the browser, just to show the log. Yeah, so here you can see before preparing food, which is are first, and then it also completes. So our main code finishes first, and then you see the actual food preparing stuff happening afterwards. So this is how you see that this is asynchronous. Our main code body finishes, and then the food prepare function starts. Now, can you come back to the code? So here you can see first we start cooking the food. So it will call the food prepare food function, and it'll log out the prepare food first, and then it will call the callback function, which will say the food is ready. And once that's done, then we call the prepare French toast function, which will start to say that we're preparing French toast now. And once that's done, it will call the callback function, which will say the French toast is ready. And after this, we'll execute the prepare coffee function, which will say now we're preparing the coffee. And that will then call back the callback function, which will say coffee is ready. So, and that will be at the end of this block of functions. So this way, you have our main code executing and finishing before this the rest of this code even starts.
Thank you so much. Zeeshan, let's get back to writing another example. Now we are going to do it with promises. Promises does exactly the same thing, but it was thought that it is much simpler than callbacks, and you don't get involved in callback hell.
Okay, so the promise basically, as you can see and you can understand with the name, it's a promise. It's a promise that function returns to you, function gives to you, that I'm promising you that I will return you something. Yeah, if you want to understand in a literal way. So promises are this way. So you once you declare a function, you create a promise and return that promise from the function. And once the promise is done, it calls you your function. So in case of our prepare food, what we can do is, should I start example with the promise?
Of course not, my brother. You are the rich guy. I cannot refuse anything.
So what we can do, as we can see this prepare food, we have seen it in a detail. So let me convert in a promise. So what I'll say, I'll call let promise. It's just my variable, so I can name it anything. Equals to new promise. And this is an object, and it requires a function which accepts two values. So we need to pass here a function. Let's say this, and this function should have two values. You can name it anything, but a standard way of calling them is resolve and reject. There will be two callback we'll receive in this promise.
Zeeshan, can you zoom the screen maybe a little bit?
Sorry?
Can you zoom in the screen, make it a little bit?
Is it better now?
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
So what we did is we created a promise. Promise required a function. Now whole our execution of function will reside in this promise. And the prepare function food function will do is it will return the promise. So this variable which we created over here will be returned from this function. So we converted this prepare food into the promise. Now once the execution is done, what promise says ask, or the signature or the specification of promise is that you call the resolve. If you are successful, call the resolve. So instead of calling a callback, we'll call this resolve. You can name it ABC, whatever it is. So in success, you call the first argument In error, you call the second argument. So these are just the name, but the standard way of calling them is resolve and
I think
reject.
a promise takes a function which passes two functions as its parameters.
Yes. So once this promise is done, what we can do is we can call the resolve. So once and I'll remove this callback from here. So our prepare food is a function which does not accept anything at this moment. It creates the promise and it returns the promise. Let me convert other functions into promise as well. So okay. So now this was the pyramid we were afraid of. I'm commenting out. Now at this moment, what we have is we have a prepare food function, we have a prepare French toast function, we have a prepare coffee function. All of them will be using the promise. So what we'll do is we'll send the callback. Instead, we'll call the resolve instead of callback. Now what we need to do is just a moment. Okay, so prepare food is what I'm going to do is I'll call the prepare food function. Prepare food. This prepare food, what this prepare food do is it returns the promise. So we'll have the variable. You can name it ABC, but actually it returning a promise. So I'll call this a promise. And let me first print this out so that we can see what it gives us.
It's a promise that some work will be done in the future.
In the future. Just like a normal promise we do. Change the index file. Okay. So before prepare food, promise, after prepare food, and prepare food. So we call the prepare food, it creates the promise, and definitely we register set timeout inside. Oh, sorry, this is the French toast function. It call the prepare food, and it calls the resolve, but we are not handling it. So at this moment we don't have. We just need to see the promise. What we have in the promise is we have two promise status: resolved and food is ready. So once the promise is done, it will give you the value. So you need to handle that value yourself. So now what we need to do is instead of I'll just comment it out. This promise have a function called then. So what I can do is promise dot then. This is a function and it requires a callback, another function. So I'll pass a function which accepts a value. This function will be passed as a first parameter of this promise. So when you are done with this, then when the promise is done, When it done with the set timeout, it calls the resolve. So which function it is when you pass the then when you pass callback to the then. Here it is. So now what we'll do is we call the ready, and there is another function dot catch. At this moment, we are not using arrow function, but all these things should be done in the arrow function because we are learning it first for the first time. So that's why I'm not using arrow function at this moment. Otherwise, we should do a lot more practice with arrow function instead of normal. Okay, so once the prepare food function is being called, it returns the promise. On that promise, we'll attach a function by calling .then and passing the, just like we were passing this callback function, exactly same, but we'll see the difference in a while. There is a two difference. So first one is we're passing this callback function. So promise.then we have a function. Let me execute it. Okay. So before prepare food, after prepare food and ready. It's exactly like we were doing with the callback. But what's the difference? The difference is now in case of our French toast, what we had to do is we had to do another call of French toast, and then we need to pass another callback. So it creating a pyramid nesting. Pyramid or a nesting function inside a function inside a function. Here, in case of promise, what we can do is we just don't need to do anything. What we'll do is return prepare French toast. We call return prepare French toast, and we will have this the callback of this resolve for this French toast we will providing over here. So the value now the difference is after calling then we are calling the prepare French toast, and we are not passing any callback over here. So it is not creating a nesting function inside a function inside a function. It creates a simple sequential tree. Promise.then it will return the first callback, and there is another asynchronous function, so it will call another then, but it is not creating a nesting. Let me show the output. Output will be the same definitely. You can see the output is same. The benefit is we can prepare coffee dot then and
we are now a then and a then and a then in a sequence.
Yes.
Instead of nesting, we have now turned that code into a sequence. And
so it shows you that it's in a sequential way. In a callback, it was going into the nesting, and it was very difficult to understand. Even if you write a callback function separately, you need to jump over and over again. So instead of jumping, the best way is to create a nesting. When you do a nesting, it will create too much of confusion. And then what we do is we call the prepare food, it returns the promise, and we call then on that promise and pass the function. This function will be passed in this resolve. Once we are done, we call the prepare French toast. This also returns a promise, but this promise will come over here and we'll call dot then, and this function will pass to the resolve of this promise. And once it is done, what we are doing, we are calling prepare coffee. It again returns the promise. Once it returns the promise, we are attaching then over into it, and we are passing callback function, and then this callback function will pass over here. And once it is done, we can see the output. So output is the same, but the beauty of code, the clarity of code is much better than the callback, much better than the callback functions.
I'll tell you something, both of you guys, something funny.
Yes.
I've been teaching these promises and callbacks for the last 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing is,
Mm-hmm.
I've yet to find a student who I was able to explain promises and he was able to use it function in their code. Most of the students, of course not all, but most of the students understood callbacks much easier than promises. I don't know why, because to me the promises were much simpler, but to most of the students, promises created more difficulty. Zeeshan, what is your experience?
I loved using them. I loved using them because it creates the simplicity. The main problem because of the students get confused or don't like using a promise is because it creates the disconnect that we are returning a prepare toast and how it is accepting over in the then function. So what will be in that resolve function? So it creates the disconnect for them. That's why student gets confused for this.
Zeeshan, Adil, can you please revise this?
Yeah, there's also this question: when will the reject be used? Maybe that's a good
Reject. Okay, so let me add a simple a value. Let's say
before we go forward, let's Adil revise it.
Okay.
All right. So as you saw in the previous example, when you were using the callbacks, and that we saw that mess that was created because of the nested function calls. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to get out of it. And because it may have seemed to be simple in that example because we didn't have much code in there, we were just putting through like a log. But if we actually have an application, it's going to have like quite a lot of code in each function. And things will get very hard to manage. So instead of doing it that way, this promises technique has been developed so we can create promises to handle each of those steps without doing the nested functions. And what we can do is we can use this dot then method that we have in each with each promise to call each function in a sequence. So if you start from the top, we have a function called prepare food, and within the function we are creating this promise. So we're just basically storing the value in a variable called promise, and we're creating here a new promise which has two values: a function which has we're giving it two parameters here, the resolve and the reject. We'll see reject moving forward. Let's just talk about what this function is doing right now. It's doing the same exact thing as before. We're giving out the console log for preparing food, and once it's done, we're passing the value food is ready to this resolve. And can we, and then this whole function is returning this promise, the value of the promise. So if you scroll down to where this is being called, resolve food is ready. So when this executes, if you can scroll down now, where is the function being called?
Where's the call?
Yeah.
Yes.
Here. So yeah. So we're creating this variable again promise, which stores the function call, and here we can see promise dot then. This is where we actually start to we've called this function, and once it starts, we start this sequence of events with the first promise dot then. And what we're doing here is we're passing the function, which this is our callback function, right? Uh, this is the same code as the callback function where we log out that the food is ready. And once that is done, then we trigger the next function to be called, which is the French toast function. And the way we have linked this together is when we started the promise, we did promise dot then to execute the first function. And when it's completed, we executed the next function with another dot then on line 38 here. And then here we're calling the next function, the French toast, and we're getting the French toast value back from the French toast function. And once that executes, we log it, and then we call the next callback function, the prepare coffee function. Then we call, which executes the prepare coffee function. And once that's completed, we have the sequence continues with the dot then, and we call the coffee value, the coffee function to prepare the coffee, and this logs the coffee is ready. And then this is where our sequence is completed, and at the very end we also have like a error exception handling. This is so if in the event there's any error in this whole execution, it will throw the whatever the error message is, you will get into the log. Right.
Zeeshan, let's explain the now error. Resolve and
Okay.
Actually, what do you?
Okay, so in some case, during the execution, or if you are receiving an input which is not acceptable, so you can return an error so that you are not accepting, or there is some error. There can be an error in execution, so you can call the reject function. At this moment, we don't have any much of that information. So what I'm doing is I'm accepting value called data. And in set timeout, what I'm doing is, let's say, go into the set timeout. If data not equal to 2, just for the example, then we call a normal process, else it should reject value not okay. So in case of this reject, what will happen is, once we call the prepare food and pass then over then and then catch. So because the chain of promises breaks once you call the reject. So we call, instead of resolve, if it called reject, so execution will directly go to the catch function, and all your promise chain breaks because one of the promise does not fulfill it. It does not have a correct value. It rejects the execution. There is an error, so all the chain, the complete chain of the promises will break. So at this moment, we have seen the normal process, so I'll pass the 2 over here so that we can see the error flow of error. So I pass the 2, and once I execute this, error value is not acceptable. This error handling is being done over here. So promise provides the built-in functionality how to handle the error. If there is an error, what you will do is you will call the reject. Once you call the reject, it will break all the chain and will directly go to the catch function. This is how you call the reject.
Now, what happened in the last few years,
Mm-hmm.
they created two keywords,
Mm-hmm.
async and await,
Yes.
which basically made asynchronous code writing very easy, but it also uses promises. Let's do that. Let's convert this example into async await.
Okay. So go to the in case of async await, our promise will remain the same because the asynchronous logic will be done in a promise way. So the promise will provide you the functionality which can create asynchronous function. So the promise will remain the same for the prepare food, for the French toast, for the prepare coffee, and instead of calling this promise chain, what I will do is I will create a function, async function. Now, in async and await case, what we do is let in case of async, when we are calling the prepare food, it will return the value. It will wait until the promise is complete. Promise will be completed. So food value equals to prepare food. Here, at this moment, I'm just calling it directly. And we know that if I'll call this prepare food directly, it will return the promise. So instead of calling it directly, we need to provide keyword await. So you can see I have provided the function keyword async with the function and an await with the function calling. So async will always be used in function declaration. Await will always be used when you are calling the function. And await function, a function with which you want to use await keyword must be called in async function. So you cannot do this. It will not work because at this moment our JavaScript file is a plain JS file. It does not have any async function. That's why I created the start process function. So what we'll do is we call the await prepare food. The beauty is await means wait till the prepared food is done. So once the prepared food is done, it will give you the response, and that response, that resolved response, will be available directly in the food value. Let me show. Okay, so prepare food, food dinner is ready, prepare food, and food is ready. So as simple as that, food is ready. It's exactly again the same process. In case of promise, we were passing this callback into the promise. Instead, what we are doing is we are calling the await keyword, and prepare food will wait. This line will not be executed until the async function, this function will return. So we will wait till if this process is complete and the food value returns. We have the value of the food, and then we call this value. here. Now to complete the process, what we can do is it will be a really simple.
So instead of writing then,
Yes.
and you basically just write await,
Yes.
and get the result.
Cannot access Hira Coffee. Conflict with the variable name. Okay, so now prepare food, food is ready. Prepare French toast is ready. Prepare coffee, coffee is ready. So that's how we write this process. Okay, and let me remove all this. Now there are two things. First one is you can ask a question that it becomes the asynchronous because it will wait for the prepared food to be done and then French toast will be called. So we are back to the zero that it is being called in a synchronous way. But the difference is once the prepare food is being called, it will not wait for our function to complete. It will not wait our process and it will not hang our process. For example, let me call console.log. No, this will still will not be the start process. We call the start process before prepare food, and there is after prepare food. So when we call the start process, the execution goes into the background. So whenever you are calling the async function, execution will go into the background. So you can see the before prepare food, after prepare food. So our execution of normal JavaScript finishes, it ends, and the start process will start executing the code prepare food in the background, and we have the promise for that. Code exactly same as we were doing with the promise then function. So declaring a function will stay the same, but the calling a function will be greatly improved and greatly simplified.
Zeeshan, you have done a marvelous job. What we are going to do is, in the next class, we are going to discuss how to use these async await and how to fetch data. And we will move forward in the class. Adil, why don't you go ahead?
I need to add one more thing for the reject. For the reject.
Go ahead.
Okay. So if in this case, the beauty here is another thing is if there is a and a problem, the error. If you have the error, so we will be using the standard JavaScript feature, try and catch. And as we have did in last example, that if we data does not have data has a value of 2, then it will reject the function. So I'll pass the 2 over here. Error in catch. So it greatly simplifies the execution of code and the visibility of code. If you see with the promises, this is how you call with the promises, and this is how you call with the callback function. So it greatly improves the flow and the display and the beauty of code.
Okay. Zeeshan, why don't you go ahead and push this code on GitHub? In the meanwhile, Adil will revise it for other students.
So,
But if I'll be using a different screen, Adil will not be able to.
Yeah, I forgot it. Okay, first, why don't you push the code, Zeeshan, so that everybody gets the code? That is the main point.
Okay.
In a video, there's you can get around by revising the video anyway. But I want two people to give their different views how to explain things so that everybody understands, at least from two different people.
Okay, so code is pushed now. Okay, so you can access now code, and
Just,
let's see. Let's go back to the. Okay.
please show the URL to everyone.
Okay, just a moment. So URL is github.com/Zeeshan Hanif.
Can you make the font bigger, a little bit bigger, so that everybody can see?
Yes.
github.com/Zeeshan Hanif. I'll just put a banner here. What's the name of it? Demo async.
Demo async programming.
Everybody can go and check, because this is a tough concept to understand. Everybody can go and check the other. We don't have enough time left, but therefore you have been saved. Not explaining. You have been in the boxing match. You have been saved by the bell.
Saved by the bell. Yeah.
Saved by the bell. Okay, everybody. Let's in the next class. We will basically on Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time. We will start fetching data and start doing asynchronous programming. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Mr. Adil. Thank you, Mr. Zeeshan. And both of you, I will find a very beautiful, wealthy, sincere girl for you, both of you. So
the same. Both of you. Not. That sounds like you're trying to find the same for both of us. That's the problem. This needs to be asynchronous. It needs to be asynchronous.
I'm trying to find with the same qualities.
Okay.
Okay. Thank everybody. Thank you so much. See you around.
See you. Bye.
Okay. Bye.